hello there, and again, welcome to another edition here of Biblical News Updates and Commentary. Good to have all of you with us once again. You know, as you saw us portray, we tried to illustrate to you by virtue of all those headlines that we showed at the opening of just how big, how large the scope of this sex trafficking industry is and how it's picking up steam around the world. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's embedded inside it a pedophilia pandemic that's growing. Oh yeah, that's right, my friends. And the internet is serving the purpose in its culpability of providing much of the access to all of this information and including, sadly and unfortunately, even human beings for sexual favors. As a matter of fact, U.S. Representative Mr. Brad Winstrup, he said that it's now as easy to order a pizza from Papa John's as it is to order a human being for sex. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, my friends, second only to drug trafficking. It's already exceeded the sales of illegal arms worldwide. That's how big it is. I want to share with you some statistics just to illustrate to you the enormity of this particular human trafficking industry, of which the sex trafficking part of it is just a small portion of this. Believe it or not, are you ready for this? 20 million people are involved in some kind of human trafficking. And what I mean by that is anything from domestic servitude to forced labor to bonded labor, child labor, forced marriages, anything that might be characterized and or construed as somebody being held against their will to do something that they don't really want to do, and they cannot escape from the circumstances they find themselves trapped by. Oh yeah, my friends, in that 20 million plus people in the human trafficking industry, we've got approximately 3 to 5 million. These numbers are estimated, of course. We don't really know. This all comes from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. It's an estimate to the best of their knowledge, but how much goes unreported, we don't know. But 3 to 5 million are actually involved in the human sex trafficking industry globally. And sadly, 50% estimates are children, of which 76% of that 50 are actually underage females in the sex slave industry, and of which 2 million is conservatively estimated that children underage are subjected to prostitution. Oh yes, globally, my friends, this is a approximate $32 billion industry. 1.5 million victims are located in the United States, with 300,000 Americans under 18 exploited and or dragged into the sex trade every year. And it's only going to get worse. And why do I say that? Because organized crime is now getting involved. And what's really disturbing, what's really maddening, is that the main targets in the pedophilia sector of the sex trafficking industry are children in the age area, the age segment between 11 and 14 years old are the most attractive for these pedophiles to obtain for sexual favors. That's right. And the children, it goes even worse though, because that's the most attractive, but there are pedophiles that favor, my friends, I hate to even say it, infants, babies that can't even walk. So many of these children, and 80% are women, unfortunately. And if they do live any length of time in that trade, their average life is approximately 7 years. My friends, this is a scourge on our societies throughout the world. How could this happen, you say? Well, I've got a few things I want to share with you here in a moment. But it is so bad, it is of such scope and of such intensity that even Dr. Phil, of all things, dedicated a full program of his back in March of this year, 2017, had a woman named Miss Kendall. I don't know if that's her real name or not, but she proceeded during the course of that program to describe and explain all these horrible and just atrocious events and things that she went through and experienced while she was in this sex trafficking industry. It was so hard to believe. I mean, I couldn't wrap my mind around some of the things I was hearing. Some of the things that I was hearing were so hard to believe that you wonder, how can this be? But yet, the evidence is growing. The evidence is growing. As a matter of fact, just a few years ago, 2016, in Helsinki, that's right, the capital of Finland, over 50 people were essentially victimized, with over 20 people arrested in the largest pedophile network that was ever busted in the city of Helsinki. U.S. Speaker, you know it, Dennis Hassert, busted for molesting underage boys. Jared Fogle, yeah, you know, the subway guy, he was busted for sex with teenage girls. And Jimmy Savile, of the old BBC celebrity, he was busted also for abusing hundreds of children for decades. And convicted pedophile Peter Wrighton, who passed away some years ago, former consultant to the National Children's Bureau, and that's right, I said he was convicted pedophile, working in children's services of all things, claimed with information that he had being in that industry that there were so many people in high government officials, people would be shocked to know who they were. People that were in the clergy, people that were in parliament, and he even alluded to the fact that there might be even royalty involved. An internet ring, an internet pedophile ring of 70,000 members was just busted by Europol under the name of Operation Rescue, a European police group that generated 670 or so suspects. Hundreds of people were arrested, and the good news, over 200 children were recovered and rescued from that horrible, horrible lifestyle. 30 countries are involved in this 70,000 member pedophile network. Australia, Italy, located in the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, even in Thailand, with clients of all types and kinds, ages from 19 years old all the way up to 84 years old. That's clients, people that are getting the services from 11 to 14-year-olds and or even infants who can't even walk. These are the people that are involved: professionals, celebrities, politicians, ministers, and policemen. Even the state of Georgia here in the United States, all the way to Connecticut, ICE has gotten leads from this bust that just has recently occurred. My friends, this is horrible news when you think about it. The times that we're living in today is almost nightmarish in scope and in magnitude because of the conditions and reprobate and perversions that we see throughout this world. And it gets worse. It gets worse because as you get into this, you begin to understand that there are connections, specific connections to Satan worship, spirit cooking, even, as hard as it is to believe, and I know this is hard to believe, human sacrificing. That's right, human sacrificing. The Apostle Paul had a very interesting thing to say in a couple of occasions to a young man named Timothy, as well as to a congregation there in Corinth. In Timothy, I want to point out something here that he mentioned we would see in the latter days. This is the second book of Timothy, chapter 3. I'm going to be reading from the Weymouth New Testament. It's a little bit easier to read than the King James. Follow me through this, though. If you've got a King James, you'll see where I'm going with it. It's close enough. Nevertheless, it says here, Paul writes to this young man, "But of this be assured, in the last days grievous times will set in. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boasting or boastful, haughty, profane. They will be disobedient to parents, thankless, irreligious, destitute of natural affection." And believe you me, pedophilia is destitute of natural affection. "Unforgiving, slanderous. They will have no self-control, but will be brutal, opposed to goodness, treacherous, headstrong, self-important, egotistical. They will love pleasure instead of loving God, and will keep up a make-believe of piety and yet live in defiance of its power. From such, turn away from these people of this sort. Among them are included the men who make their ways into private houses and carry off weak women as their prisoners. And he continues on. Over here in 1 Timothy and in chapter 1, I just want to share this with you. In verse 8 we read, "Now we know that the law is good if a man uses it in the way he should be used. And remember that a law is not enacted to control a righteous man, but for the lawless and the rebellious, the irreligious and the sinful, the godless and the profane, for those who strike their fathers and their mothers, for murderers, fornicators," that's sex out of wedlock. Those are people that are not married, but they're shacked up and living together, or they're not even living together, they're just having sex in the back seats of cars or wherever they may please to do. That's outside of marriage. That's what fornication is all about. Sodomites, he says. Slave dealers. That's what we're talking about here, my friends. Slave dealers. Pedophilia. The sex trade, the human trafficking trade is all about slave dealers. Liars and false witnesses, and for whatever else is opposed to wholesome teaching and is not in accordance with the good news of the blessed God with which I have been entrusted. The Apostle Paul over here to the church in Corinth states this in verse 9 of chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians. He says this, "Do you not know that the unrighteous man will not inherit God's kingdom?" It's that simple. Paul's being very matter-of-fact here. He goes on and he says, "Cherish no delusion here, neither fornicators nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor any who are guilty of unnatural crimes." Having sex with an infant that can't even walk, I would say, is an unnatural crime, my friends. It's the world we're living in today. I can't even believe I'm talking about these kinds of things, and yet we see these things being evidenced right before our very eyes. "Nor thieves, nor avaricious people, nor any who are addicted to hard drinking, to abusive language, or to greed of gain will inherit God's kingdom." All this describes what some of you were. Paul is, of course, assuming, giving the benefit of the doubt, that none of them were involved with this now. However, as you continue to read through here, there's an underlying, what you could say, double speak that Paul is attempting to try to get a message to some who apparently may still be involved in this lifestyle while they're still in the church. He goes on, he says, "But now you have had every stain washed off. Now you have been set apart as holy. Now you have been pronounced free from guilt in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ and through the Spirit of God. Everything," he says, Paul does, "is allowable to me, but not everything is profitable. Everything is allowable to me, but to nothing will I become a slave." That's right. You have freedom of choice. You can do anything you want to do. But the fact of it is there are restraints and boundaries all of us should implement and care in our lives to have and restrain ourselves from doing the things that we know are perverted, that are reprobate, that are counterintuitive to the very God of the Bible. These are things that Paul is saying, look, get a handle on yourself, control your appetites, and control those things that drive you to do the things that you know would dishonor your God. He says everything is available, verse 12 now, this is 1 Corinthians chapter 6, to me, but to nothing will I become a slave. Food of all kinds is meant for the stomach, and the stomach is meant for food, and God will cause both of them to perish. Yet the body does not exist for the purpose of fornication. So he goes back now. He says, but for the master's service, and the master exists for the body. And as God by his power raised the master to life, so he will also raise us up. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take away the members of Christ and make them the members of a prostitute? And there seems to be some implication here. Paul is very instructive, and he's bearing down on this church here in Corinth. No, indeed, he says. Or do you not know that a man who has to do with a prostitute is one with her in body? For God says, the two shall become one. And he references Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. But he who is in union with the master is one with him in spirit. Flee from fornication. Any other sin that a human being commits lies outside the body, but he who commits fornication sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your bodies are a sanctuary of the Holy Spirit who is within you, the Spirit whom you have from God? And you are not your own, for you have been redeemed at infinite cost. Therefore, glorify God in your bodies. What's my point in all this, my friends? My point is we need to protect and we need to teach our children. We need to bring them up in the Lord and instruct them to be aware and to know that the boundaries by which we live our lives, even though anything and everything is accessible, needs to be constrained and captured unto Christ in all things. We need to learn to control our appetites, as I mentioned before. The Apostle John, over there in his first epistle, states that the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, these are the windows that serve for us to become ungodly if we don't control ourselves. Self-control becomes a very important element in all of our lives in exercising the management of those three areas primarily that John brought up. So my friends, take time, be aware, don't be the old proverbial ostrich and put your head in the sand and not think that there are things going on around us that are pretty horrible. Watch your children. When you're in public, hold their hand if indeed it necessitates that kind of environment. When in a restaurant, take the time, go into the restroom with them, because today, in this day and age, there's no telling, my friends, and I'm being serious about this. There's no telling what a little 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, or 12, or 11 to 14, 11 to 18-year-old may find in the restroom. I'm not saying if you're 18 to take him to the restroom. You don't have to do that. But my point being, certainly watch out for our children. Educate them and teach them. Life is becoming a bit more confusing for many, many people in this world, and it's growing around us. As I said, the label of this program is pedophilia, a growing pandemic. It is becoming enormous in size, not to mention just the sex trafficking industry of its own. We have an offer that would like to take a moment here to give you. It's free, as we normally do, and it will help you to perhaps take to heart what the Apostle Paul there was warning us of and give you some idea of how to go ahead and implement some of the controls that are so necessary. It's titled How to Build Godly Character. It's a booklet. It has some very good insight on some principles that you can implement in your life that will help you to better identify and perhaps control those boundaries that you confine yourself in spite of all things being allowable. They certainly aren't acceptable or expedient, especially when you add the element of God into the equation, because He clarifies a lot of what is indeed acceptable. So go ahead and hit us on that website at www.cgi.org or email us at info@cgi.org, or there's a third way, dial 903-939-2929 Central Time in the United States between the hours of about 9 and 4 and request, as I mentioned, this free, and I want to emphasize, free booklet. It will be so helpful to you in guiding you and instilling in you insight on how to manage your life in a world that is growing more reprobate all around us on a day-by-day basis. My friends, this is Bill Watson, hoping to see you right back here for another edition of Biblical News Updates and Commentary.